Thank you and welcome to the University of California, and welcome to the many people participating in this presentation through our webinar. Today we will be the first to learn about the important and surprising findings of a national survey of economic developers and their marketing strategies. The survey was conducted through the University of California, Berkeley's Department of City and Regional Planning and supported by GIS Planning. My name is Claudine Del Rosario. It is my pleasure to introduce our two presenters today and then have a question and answer section with them after the presentation is concluded. First, I would like to introduce Eric Simunza. He is a graduate of the UC Berkeley Department of City and Regional Planning's Master Program. He has experience in workforce, economic development, and city planning. Mr. Simunza previously worked at Seedco in New York City, where he managed multi-million-dollar government employment services contracts for a network of community-based organizations. He has also worked for the New York City Department of City Planning. Mr. Simunza coordinated the survey, analyzed the results, and provided extensive research for the report. Our other presenter is Anatalia Ubalde, co-founder of GIS Planning and ZoomProspector.com. GIS Planning is on the Inc. 5000 list of the fastest-growing companies in the USA. Mr. Ubalde's work in economic development has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, ABC News, and TechCrunch. He is the recipient of the International Economic Development Council Outstanding Economic Developer of the Year Award. He is a member of the Board of Directors for IEDC. Mr. Ubalde is a highly sought-after speaker on the subject of economic development marketing and internet strategies and has made presentations on the subjects throughout North America, Asia, and Europe.
Economic developers must be adept at implementing strategies to promote their communities and grow their local economies. They must know how to communicate with businesses to be successful in this pursuit. Recent changes in communication, especially the rise of the internet, are profoundly altering how business communication and research takes place, and are influencing how businesses engage in the process of site selection and interact with economic development organizations. Many economic development agencies are responding to these changes through the way they market their communities and provide their services. Others have been left scrambling to make sense of how their industry is changing. Recent technology and globalization changes have only increased the dynamic nature of marketing. So economic developers are now reevaluating how to most effectively communicate with businesses. As the paths of communication between communities and businesses have broadened and the business demands for rapid information communication have increased, the necessity of effective marketing communications has become more critical.
Now, given these challenges, we wanted to find out how economic developers are or are not responding with their marketing programs. And to find that out, we had to ask them. We developed an online survey that was distributed through economic development member associations at the local, regional, and national level. The survey asked respondents a series of questions relating to their own marketing programs, including how they budget, what strategies they use, and what their perceptions of these different strategies are. The survey received over 1,000 responses that represented all 50 states. They represented a wide variety of national and international economic development associations. They were primarily decision makers, as 89% were either managers or executives in their organizations. The survey resulted in some very important discoveries, which will constitute the remainder of our presentation. We'll first show which marketing strategies were found to be most and least effective, then discuss how economic development agencies allocate their budgets among these strategies and for marketing as a whole. We'll then examine the geographic coverage of economic development marketing as well as the industries targeted. We'll then pause to highlight differences in marketing approaches based on organizational structure and characteristics of the community served, and then look at the practices of organizations that have reported themselves to have effective marketing to help determine what leads to success. We'll then look at patterns in the outsourcing of marketing strategies, then discuss the sources of information utilized by corporate real estate professionals during the site selection process. We'll then focus in on economic development websites, including which resources organizations typically provide on their websites and how they are maintained. We'll finally look at how organizations benchmark the success of the entire organization and of marketing in particular. First, we'll look at marketing effectiveness. Economic developers were asked to rate the most effective marketing strategies for economic development. 79% of economic developers rate an internet website as the most effective. The next most highly rated strategies were out-of-town meetings with businesses and site selection consultants and familiarization tours. And these both involve personal contact. The results here indicate that effective marketing must be both high-tech and high-touch, combining effective use of an online presence with personalized face-to-face service. Roughly half of respondents reported that their marketing programs were of average effectiveness, and almost as many believed that their marketing programs were effective to very effective. Very few respondents listed their marketing programs as ineffective. It is impossible for a higher percentage to be above average than below, indicating that economic developers perhaps are too optimistic.
No matter how effective a marketing strategy may be, an economic development organization needs an adequately sized budget in order to have an effective marketing program. An organization must decide how much of its total budget to devote to marketing, as well as how much to devote to each marketing strategy it pursues. The median marketing budget for respondents was $50,000, while the median budget for the organization as a whole was $500,000, meaning that economic development organizations are typically devoting about 10% of their overall budgets to marketing purposes. And this percentage tracks pretty consistently with public firms across all industries. The most effective strategy, internet websites, was found to have the highest average budget allocation. However, budgeting priorities are often not in line with what strategies work. As an example, economic development organizations spend the next highest portion of their budget on print advertising, even though only 16% of organizations rated this as an effective strategy. Trade shows and conferences and brochures rank third and fourth in terms of budget allotment, but only were perceived as effective by 36% and 20% of respondents, respectively. On the other hand, public relations, special events, and site selection consultants and familiarization tours receive comparatively low budget allotments considering their high levels of perceived effectiveness. Marketing budgets for websites and internet experienced the largest increase over the past 5 years, followed by out-of-town meetings with businesses, and then site selection consultants and FAM tours. Now, on the other hand, slogans, logos, and graphic identity are expected to have significantly less budgeting allocation in the future. This may mark an attitudinal shift in economic developers away from a focus on branding to a focus on creating internet and personal relationships. The marketing strategies that receive high budget allotments and low effectiveness ratings warrant more scrutiny, and I'll discuss them next. One of these strategies is trade shows and conferences, which receive the fourth highest budget allocation, even though only 36% of respondents rated it effective. A recent study by the Brookings Institution found that convention attendance has dropped over 50% in many cities since peaking in the late 1990s, partly due to alternative means of conveying and gathering information. Site selection magazines have experienced a 62% decline in ad pages from 1999 to 2007. Two of the leading publications for the site location industry have ceased print publication within the last few years, Plant Sites and Parks in 2004, and Expansion Management in 2008. In the next chart, you can see bolded strategies were more frequently reported to have decreased than increased in the past 5 years or in the next 5 years. Economic development organizations reported on average they'd scaled back their financing of television, radio, videos, print advertising, online advertising, and direct mail. But in the next 5 years, you can see that actually online advertising and direct mail look like they're going to increase. Only 2% of economic development marketing budgets allocated toward online advertising, and only 13% of respondents identified it as an effective strategy. This is dramatically different from the trends occurring in the larger US market of companies. The share of spending in online advertising approached 10% of marketing budgets in 2008. In the graph, it shows the revenues over time, and online advertising revenues can be seen to have grown 400% from 2002 to 2007. You can see here where there was this was during the dot-com boom. This is what was considered the crash. But you can see where we are today is significantly higher.
Okay, and now any marketing program needs a clearly defined audience. And an economic development organization should define the reach of its audience in terms of both geography and the range of industries. These pie charts here show both the organization's service area and the target market area. The average target market area was substantially larger than the average service area. 64% of organizations served areas at the city or county level, while at the same time 56% marketed globally or nationwide. Now, 73% of economic developers selected manufacturing as one of their top 5 targeted industries, over 20% more than information technology and high tech, the next most targeted industry. Business services ranked the next highest. These results are surprising in light of the overall employment decline of the manufacturing sector nationwide, where employment dropped 20% from 1985 to 2005. Characteristics that define an economic development organization, both in terms of the structure of the organization itself, as well as the characteristics of the community it serves, were found to impact the marketing approaches used. Government and economic development corporations were the most represented types of organizations in the survey. The 2 most effective strategies, internet, website, and out-of-town meetings with businesses, were made a higher priority of government than of economic development corporations. Government also gave lower budget allocations to print advertising and brochures. The respondent organizations represented a wide variety of service areas in terms of population size. There was a spike in the range between 25,000 and 200,000 residents, or 250,000 residents, as well as the range between 1 and 5 million. A relatively new strategy for some economic developers is the focus on industries and businesses that create amenities desired by the creative class and young professionals, which is becoming more widely part of the industry discourse. Creative class, a term coined by Dr. Richard Florida. Small and rural areas were more likely than larger and more urban areas to prioritize the attraction of retail, food service accommodation, and arts and entertainment. Urban areas had a stronger orientation to targeting industries that create jobs for those in the knowledge economy, such as finance, science, and high tech. The types of areas represented were fairly evenly distributed, with slightly more rural areas represented than urban or suburban. Rural areas spent the highest budget share on websites, while urban areas spent the least. Respondents were also grouped into 4 different regions, West, Midwest, South, and Northeast. Regions were based on the general boundaries of the major regional economic development associations. Midwestern organizations were found to spend the most of any region on websites, while Western organizations spent the most on public relations. The differences by service area and organizational structure were somewhat surprising. Innovation was found to occur in rural areas, not in urban areas, and in the Midwest instead of on the coasts. And in government, not in economic development corporations.
So far, we've looked at how economic development organizations generally define their target audience, set their marketing budgets, and choose strategies. But what sets organizations that have particularly effective marketing programs apart from the rest? The survey results contain some clues. The survey asked respondents to rate the effectiveness of their overall marketing programs. We looked at the responses of those who gave their marketing high marks versus those who did not. Effective marketers devoted 18% more total staff time to marketing than ineffective marketers. Their marketing budgets of $99,000 was more than twice that of ineffective marketers at $40,000. Interestingly, they did not allocate their budgets differently than ineffective marketers. Here we see in more detail how effective marketers and ineffective marketers allocate staff time. The biggest difference lay in their allocation for marketing. What this all shows is that it is seemingly less important how an organization spends its marketing budget than how much they have to spend to begin with. Significant discrepancies exist between the industry targeting practices of effective marketers and ineffective marketers, which largely echo those found between economic developers and site selectors. Effective marketers mirrored the priorities of site selectors by placing more emphasis on business services, the sciences, information technology, and financial services, while correspondingly placing less emphasis on manufacturing, retail, and agriculture.
The survey also asked respondents their age. We wanted to see if that affected the responses, but many people did not answer this question, and the small sample size prevented us from finding differences in response by age that were statistically significant. At the same time, some patterns were evident. Younger respondents rated the internet as a more effective marketing tool and gave lower marks to direct mail. They reported that their websites for their respective organizations were updated more frequently, and they gave higher ratings to their overall marketing programs and techniques. As we have already seen, the marketing strategies necessary for economic development are numerous. Outside contractors may be necessary to perform certain functions due to limitations such as the size of economic development organizations, internal expertise, or specialization of the strategy. A comparison of those marketing strategies that were ranked effective and those that were outsourced reveals that the strategies that are ranked least effective have a stronger likelihood of being outsourced. The exception to this is the highest rated strategy, internet website. There are some possible explanations for this trend. Perhaps economic developers only work on something internally if they feel it is really ineffective, and outsource anything they feel is not as effective. A second possible reason is that economic developers are bringing in outside expertise to work on the things they are least effective at implementing. A third possibility is that economic developers are allocating their valuable resources for outside experts into ineffective marketing strategies because they are under the false impression that these marketing strategies are actually important and effective. A fourth reason, articulated by economic developers at a recent IEDC professional development training, is that the complexity of marketing requires that some strategies include both internal work and outsourcing. Among the most effective marketing strategies, the three outliers experienced a high level of outsourcing: websites, targeted lead development databases, and slogans, logo, and graphic identity. It is worth noting that these strategies require relatively specialized skill sets to implement that don't typically fall within the expertise or job descriptions of economic development professionals. In the case of targeted lead development databases, implementation requires access to large databases of businesses and modeling systems to identify specific indicators for which businesses are better candidates to be targeted. In the case of slogans, economic developers may be able to develop taglines, but the associated graphics require design expertise. Similarly, websites may be outsourced because they are still a relatively new phenomenon for which organizations typically do not internally possess the necessary expertise to develop strategies to build and maintain their websites themselves. Also, unlike some of the more traditional marketing skill sets, websites are rapidly evolving in all industries and continue to require advanced technical skills to keep up with the emerging online technologies. This may make outsourcing a more practical solution.
For economic development organizations working with site selectors, it's important to understand the behavior of these professionals. How and when site selectors obtain information about communities matters. Because of this, the results of a separate, parallel national survey were brought in. Over 100 companies participate in this survey, including, you can see a number of them, Toyota, Google, Cushman & Wakefield, Jones Lang LaSalle. There's just a wide variety of them that did participate, the Austin Group, and others. In this survey, site selectors were asked when, during the process of site selection, they would first contact an economic development organization, and when they would first visit an economic development organization's website. In each of the first three stages of site selection, site selectors are far more likely to visit the website than make a phone call to the organization. Looking at the same results cumulatively, we can see that 98% of site selectors use the websites of economic development organizations at some point in their research. This means that at least 98% of site selectors are using the internet in some form for site selection research. Just as important, 99% of site selectors reported personally contacting an economic development organization at some point during the site selection process, confirming that economic development professionals, of course, do indeed add value to a community, as virtually everyone involved in the site selection relies on their services. We can also determine here that by the end of the third stage of site selection, site selectors were almost 1.5 times as likely to have visited economic development organization websites than to have personally contacted any organization. That means that 43% of possible site selector contact is lost by not communicating effectively through an organization's website. So if we take a look at the chart, you can see here that as the process is moving along, economic development organizations being contacted is significantly less than where they're visiting websites, up to the point at which they've already narrowed options to a short list of a few finalists. What are the implications of this to economic developers? Well, it's pretty straightforward. This is a situation where if you don't have the information that businesses and corporate real estate professionals are looking for on your website, you put yourself at risk because that's where they're getting their information. And you can, as you can see from the numbers, get eliminated from the site selection process before you're even contacted. This survey complements a 2006 article by Bob Adey. He found that within the 6 years previous to the study, the length of the typical site selection process shrank from over 6 months to only 4 to 8 weeks. He also found that site selection process was typically involving more communities, that a much greater percentage of the process was being performed online, that the primary tool for learning about communities had shifted from personal visits to the internet. So looking at the numbers he had versus the results of this survey, and they're quite consistent. The survey respondents had the opportunity to answer open-ended questions, and one of them gave this quote. It says, "We often get calls from businesses that are already past the early stage of their decision-making process because they use our website tools to help them with their analysis. Because of our website, our staff now spends more time with qualified and educated businesses instead of people that are just asking simple questions when they aren't even sure if they're going to invest in our community."
Okay, as the survey results have demonstrated, both economic developers and site selectors find websites to be the most effective marketing strategy for economic development. Respondents indicated that demographic reports were the most important element to include on a website, followed closely by information on the labor force, a land sites and building inventory, and maps. Most organization websites possess, at the very least, hyperlinks to other organizations, staff directory and contact information, maps, and demographic reports. Many of the features that are not currently included on most websites are items that organizations plan to implement in the next 5 years, and those are shown on the bottom with the larger section in blue. Today, economic development organizations tend to present their information in a static form rather than an interactive one. However, many organizations plan to implement interactive capabilities within the next 5 years. As can be seen from this graph, then the amount of people that will add interactive mapping, site selection analysis, and demographic features is greater than the amount that currently has these interactive features, indicating that interactive economic development websites will experience dramatic growth and become the new majority. 81% of economic developers said that a GIS-based site selection tool is or would be helpful for their work. In the separate survey of site selectors, 77% found this technology valuable. Even given these highly favorable ratings, only 33% of economic developers currently reported having such a system. Yet, 34% indicated they will add it to their websites within 5 years, which will make it a service provided by the majority of economic development organizations. Given that economic development organizations rated the website as the most effective marketing tool, it is surprising that 45% of respondents reported that their website was updated monthly or less frequently. A serious problem for economic developers trying to leverage the real-time value of websites as a marketing tool is that 9% of organizations only update their websites 1 or 2 times a year. The survey results show that most organizations have room to improve their online presence. 29% lack website analytics services. 45% only update their websites monthly, and 9% only update them once or twice annually. In addition, 67% lack online site selection assistance. Clearly, economic development organizations can do more to increase the effectiveness of their websites. The special value of an economic development organization's website was highlighted by one respondent who wrote in an open-ended question. And here he says, "Just because our organization is in a magazine doesn't mean everyone read it. Just because we have a special event doesn't mean that people didn't come just for the free food or booze. But you don't come to a website because it's fun. You come because you are interested in our economic development. As with any field, marketing and economic development should be measured and benchmarked to help improve performance. Benchmarking the success of economic development efforts involves a unique set of measurements, as most marketing metrics revolve around eventual product sales. It is rather easy to measure the sale of tangible items such as automobiles, shoes, or blenders, but a community is rather different, as there is no sales data that can be directly attributed to a community. So the question is asked, then, how can an economic development organization benchmark its success? Well, in our survey, respondents pointed to job creation as the most important benchmark for the success of an economic development organization, followed by capital investment, announced projects, and increased government revenues. Job creation is a viable metric for benchmarking because organizations can quantify how many new jobs there are from a startup, expansion, or relocation, and report that to a board of directors or elected officials. Respondents indicated very clearly that when it comes to their own marketing efforts, the generation of leads, which may result in business deals, is the most important criterion. However, the next two most highly rated criteria, awareness, recall of the organization, and change of perception about the community, are abstract concepts that are extremely difficult to measure in any systematic way. The other category received the second highest average rating, indicating that economic development organizations differ widely on how to benchmark marketing. Popular responses included site visits, proposals given, and company locations. Sadly, the most common alternate response given by respondents was that their organizations did not benchmark their marketing in any way.
The results of the survey reveal solid conclusions that may help reduce some of the uncertainty that economic developers face when deciding how to best promote their community. Both economic developers and site selectors agree that an organization's website provides the most effective marketing strategy for economic development. Although websites are perceived as effective tools, most economic development organizations could do far more to increase their effectiveness. They should be tracked more, made more interactive, and kept more up to date. Economic development organizations should also recognize the importance of personal, face-to-face interaction. The services of knowledgeable economic development staff are truly irreplaceable. Economic developers are a valuable part of businesses making an investment in a community. Our profession is important, our industry is important, and the face-to-face contact that we have with businesses will remain critical. Economic development organizations do not always prioritize their budgets in terms of what strategies they find effective. Public relations, special events, site selection consultants and FAM tours, and targeted lead development databases were all rated very effective, but were given less money than low-rated strategies. In addition to spending on what is effective, economic developers need to spend more on marketing, period. Those who reported having effective marketing programs also reported devoting more staff time to marketing, as well as having significantly higher marketing budgets. Targeting the manufacturing industry is the top priority of economic developers, even though it's a declining employment sector. High-growth industries such as business services, information, and finance receive lower priority. Looking forward, successful economic developers must either place more emphasis on businesses in expanding employment industries or target the growing subsegments of the manufacturing sector. Organizations commonly judge marketing effectiveness through immeasurable criteria or do not benchmark their marketing at all. If economic development organizations want to be able to prove their marketing value, they must measure criteria that are actually measurable. So this completes the recommendations that we have. I hope that economic developers who have seen the results of this survey see the opportunity here, because there are tremendous opportunities to best serve your community by identifying what marketing strategies can be most effective for you. Every community has something to offer, and economic development practitioners must be experts in communicating what that something is. We live in a time when the methods of communication are changing rapidly. Practitioners that can best adjust to these changes will be in the best position to help their communities thrive. So at this point, we've completed the presentation. I'd like to thank Eric, and I'll now turn it over to Claudine.
Eric and Anatalia, thank you so much for a really informative talk. I think that there's a lot that the economic development profession can learn from the results of the survey. Now I would like to engage you both to participate in questions and answers with me. I shared an advanced preview of this report to several experts in economic development and corporate site selection, and they provided me with several questions. So could you both please sit down with me? And if the audience could bear with us for a moment while we set up. First, for all of you participating in this webinar through the internet, there should be a panel on your internet browser that allows you to ask questions. Just type in your questions through the interface in your browser and submit them. Those questions will be sent to us, and we will answer as many as we can during the Q&A of this webinar. I have asked Eric and Anatalia to also try to respond to all of the questions that we can't get to now offline, and they have agreed to do their best. My first question is, what is your take on the fact that so many economic developers rated their marketing programs as effective or highly effective?
I think what this really has to do with is people want to self-identify as being normal and as self-identify in a positive way. And this isn't unique to economic development. There was a study recently by the Pew Research Center that showed that most Americans identify as middle class, over 70%, even though the middle class is shrinking, and most people obviously are not middle class.
Okay, and our next question from the audience is, how does the percentage of economic developers spending on online advertising compare to private sector companies?
So the survey showed that only 2% of economic developers' marketing budgets are spent on online advertising. That compares pretty weakly to all organizations, which typically allocate about 10% on online marketing. So when you look at that, that's a factor of 5 times more than what economic developers are doing. So I think that we can actually learn from this rather huge variation and see what's happening in other industries.
Time and money seem to be 2 very important factors for effective marketing. I was hoping that I could just work smarter. So what do you make of the generation gap?
Well, the survey showed that young people had more of a preference toward online marketing compared to older economic developers that had a preference toward direct mail. In general, though, I don't think we should place too much emphasis on the differences in results by age, except to just notice some general patterns. One thing we learned from the survey is that many economic developers are shy about sharing their age, and many people didn't. So the sample size we had to work with wasn't as large as we would have liked, and the differences were not statistically significant.
Looking back now, after completing the survey, I think perhaps another question which we should have asked was, how long have you been in the profession, as opposed to just an issue of age? Because building up a habit might be more of a factor to influence the resistance to change than age. But we don't know that from the results. I was talking to Clay Shirky, author of the new book, Here Comes Everybody, a few weeks ago. At the time, he had the #1 selling book in 2 categories on Amazon.com. His point was that the advantage that younger generations have over folks like us is that they don't have to unlearn things. I'll explain that. So for example, I know how to program a VCR. Now that's something that my son is never going to have to learn how to do. What happens is I actually have to unlearn that so that I can move to the new models of how you would record a show. So I have that useless information that's taking up space in my brain that I have to unlearn to be effective in the way that the world operates now. You know, when I talk to new economic developers, they can't imagine that people think it's a good idea to have an advertising campaign in a newspaper. And sending out a CD-ROM seems absolutely prehistoric to them. But so many of the professionals who've been in the field for a long time have learned that, that's how you do marketing. And we need to unlearn those reflexes and stop doing what doesn't work and start doing what does.
Okay. And how important will interactive websites be in the future?
Well, the survey indicates that in the next few years, the majority of economic development organizations have or are going to add interactivity to their websites, such as interactive maps, integrated GIS site selection analysis, and demographic reporting. And that's significant because anytime you're talking about a trend followed by most economic developers, it's significant. And you can think about this, if you think about which websites you like using the most, are the interactive or are they just static? Dynamic websites are going to be a competitive advantage for economic development organizations going forward, I think, and it'll be the minority of organizations that get left behind with disadvantaged websites.
Why did you also have a survey of site selectors and corporate real estate professionals?
Well, firstly, we wanted to know what they thought and how they behaved. Site selection is a different profession from economic development. However, sometimes they intersect in the places where economic developers and corporate real estate professionals work together on projects. And for that specific slice of economic development activity, we're also interested in identifying how the practices of each group compared and if there were ways that economic developers could be more effective at assisting site selection advisors.
But one of the other key points of my thinking about this is that America is not a country of big businesses that can all afford site selection consultants. We're a country whose economy is made up of small and medium-sized companies. I was at an event a couple weeks ago and was talking with Keith McFarland, who's the author of the book, The Breakthrough Company. He told me that large businesses, those with annual revenue of 250 million or more in 1 year, represent only 0.1% of all businesses in the USA. I think it's common sense that economic developers can be more successful if they focus on the other 99.9%. So what I hope economic developers will see from the survey is if you're working with or targeting site selection consultants, then you should be aware of how they act and what they do compared to what economic developers do. There's a big difference in saying if you are versus you should.
Why are you interested in economic development marketing?
Well, the reason we did this survey is we wanted to know the truth about what was happening in economic development marketing. Also, you do research because you want to be surprised. And there were many surprises in the results of this survey with important implications for the economic development industry. Based on this report, I don't think economic developers should keep repeating ineffective marketing. And I do think they should do what is working. Without national data, it leaves many economic developers feel like they're isolated on an island. Now we know what we're all doing, what's working for us, and what's not. We can make better informed decisions based on data, not on feelings, opinions, or what we wish the truth was. Now for GIS planning in our zoomprospector.com service, we're also interested in how economic development marketing and industry trends will affect our business. The results of the survey were a mix of good and bad news for us. From the survey, the good news is that there's going to be a strong trend toward the majority of economic development organizations adding online site selection analysis tools with interactive GIS, demographic reports, property search, business mapping, and dynamic maps to their websites. That's great because that's our core product offering, and we're the dominant leader in providing that service to the economic development profession. The bad news for us is that the report shows very few economic developers are doing online advertising. They currently allocate only 2% of their budget to online advertising, and it appears they're not going to increase spending that much in that area. So that's a real challenge for us because our zoomprospector.com service operates around an advertising model.
What are your opinions about the way that economic developers are benchmarking their success?
Well, there are two questions that the survey asked about benchmarking. The first was about how the organization measured its own success, and the second was how it measured the success of its marketing. So there are two responses to your question. Economic development organizations selected jobs created as their most important metric for measuring success. It's a good metric for measuring because at the end of the day, you can easily measure how many new jobs there are from a startup, expansion, or relocation. And you can go to your board of directors or elected officials and say, we created 1,000 jobs this year, and then they tell you you're doing a good job.
So one of the problems, though, with this model and measurement is it's better positioned to an agricultural or industrial economy where more employees mean more output, more revenue, and hopefully more profit. Today, businesses don't have to grow by adding more jobs. In fact, the top measure of success for economic developers is what many businesses are actually trying to avoid. Businesses don't want to add new employment because, at least in the US, new employees are very expensive. They aren't trying to increase their number of employees, they're trying to increase their revenue and profitability. In fact, they may be able to increase revenue and profitability by decreasing the number of employees and increasing automation and efficiencies. So there's a pretty clear disconnect between the benchmarking goals of economic developers and the business community.
On the marketing benchmarking side, it's very concerning that two of the three most popular criteria for benchmarking success aren't very benchmarkable. The second highest benchmarking criteria is awareness of your organization, and then the third highest is change of perception about your community. And even though economic developers are saying that this is how they're measuring marketing success, how did they really measure this, or did they measure it at all? It's pretty unlikely.
The good news from the survey is that leads generated was the #1 benchmark of success. That's a benchmark you can measure.
What didn't the survey include that now, looking back, you would have liked it to include?
Well, say blogs, social media, video, differentiating manufacturing sub-industries, I would say. Place branding was another, and years in the profession. All of those could have been talked about more, investigated in more detail. Some of the online marketing strategies are simply emerging so quickly, and we didn't see them being used by economic developers that much at the time that we started the survey. But we probably should have asked about this.
Where do you think economic developers should go from here? What can they do to be more effective?
Well, a lot of the purpose of the report was really to see what they thought and report that, but I think there are some pretty obvious recommendations that do come out of it. Really, we see that everyone's agreeing that websites are a very important strategy and are really effective, but there's still a lot that they could do to make them more effective. Targeting growth industries is another way in which it seems that the results indicate an effective way to continue. Those are just a couple of things, but we go over them in the report.
Let's not forget that the future of economic development is about being both high-tech and high-touch. That's more than just marketing, but it deals with marketing too. It's about communication, relationships, and customer service. That's another reason I think that the internet and face-to-face communication are so important and where we should be investing our efforts organizationally. Economic development is still a people profession. It's still about the relationships that we have with other people.
What surprised you the most in this survey?
The thing that really surprised me is where corporate real estate people were getting their information and when. They're doing their research off of the economic developers' websites, and they're doing that before they contact them. In fact, what the numbers show is that they're using the websites more than they're using real contact with economic developers, up to the point where they've developed a long list of locations. So that means these economic developers in the communities can get eliminated before there's any personal contact.
I guess I was struck by some of the differences by the service area and the organizational structure. It was surprising that government really was embracing the new and effective marketing strategies more than private economic development corporations. People typically think that the public sector is thought to lag the private sector. Also, it was surprising that Midwestern and rural areas were the ones that were utilizing the new and effective strategies more than urban and coastal areas, which many would assume to be at the forefront. You'd think it'd be switched.
How can someone get a copy of the survey?
If someone wants a copy of the survey, they can go to our website, which is www.gisplanning.com.
Great. And our next webinar will focus on the results of the Site Selection Consultant and Corporate Real Estate Professionals National Survey. For more information about this and to participate in this webinar, you should also go to gisplanning.com. I just want to thank you, Anatayo and Eric, for doing this Q&A session, and we'll see you next time.
And thank you so much for being such a great host.
Yeah, thank you very much.